My son had leukemia. I offered to save him. The test results made the entire medical team go silent. I am 44, male. I am a hematopathologist at a large academic medical center in the Mid-Atlantic region, which means I spend my professional hours examining what blood does when it stops working correctly. I interpret bone marrow core biopsies, peripheral smear morphology, and flow cytometry immunophenotyping panels, and I write reports that oncologists use to determine whether patients will live and by what margin. My days are built around close observation and precise language. I do not speculate in reports. I do not use hedging phrases where the data supports a conclusion. I state what I see. I am not, despite what my wife told her friends in the final weeks of our marriage, emotionally unavailable. I am trained to observe without distorting what I observe with feeling. Those are different things. People conflate detachment with coldness, and I have spent enough years in medicine to understand why, when a physician delivers a diagnosis without visible anguish, it can read as indifference. It is not. It is discipline. The anguish, when it exists, gets processed elsewhere, on personal time, in ways that do not compromise the quality of the next report. I mention this because it is the frame through which everything that follows should be understood. My wife and I met when I was 33 and she was 29. She had been contracted to coordinate the departmental holiday fundraiser at my hospital, a gala-adjacent event that the administration took seriously enough to bring in external event management. She arrived on the sidewalk with a clipboard, a wireless earpiece she never once used during the actual event, and the focused, proprietary energy of someone who treated every room as a project she was personally responsible for. I found this interesting in the way I find a well-organized methodology interesting. We had dinner 3 days later at a Mediterranean place near the hospital. She spent 20 minutes asking questions and listening to the answers with what I can only describe as genuine attention. I was not accustomed to being listened to with that quality of focus outside of professional settings. It was disarming. We were married 14 months later. She ran her event planning business from our home after the wedding. Her client list was respectable: corporate retreats, nonprofit galas, 2 political campaign fundraisers for local candidates, an annual charity auction for a children's hospital that was, honestly, a significant undertaking. She was organized in the external-facing sense. She maintained a color-coded master calendar, kept vendor contracts in labeled binders, and ran her client communications with a professionalism that I respected. The internal life of our household was less organized. Grocery planning was inconsistent. Household maintenance tasks accumulated until they became urgent rather than being addressed on schedule. I attributed this to the nature of her work, which required her to be maximally available to clients on short notice and often odd hours. I absorbed the domestic management gaps as a variable I could control and moved on. She was warm. She was funny in the specific way of people who are deeply social. Her humor landed on other people because she had spent real time learning what made them laugh. She knew the names of our neighbors' children, their birthdays, their school grades. She sent flowers when people in our circle experienced loss or achievement. She maintained what I thought of as a social infrastructure that I, by nature, would never have built and was, honestly, glad to benefit from. We had dinner parties. We had a full calendar. We went to the kinds of events that I would not have been invited to without her. I want to be fair about this. She was a full person with genuine gifts. I am not writing about someone who was entirely a performance. I am writing about someone who had a specific problem with truth in high-stakes situations, which is different. Our son was born 9 months and 12 days after our wedding. This was not, at the time, a fact I examined with any particular focus. We had been together for over a year. We were married. The timing of a pregnancy within the first year of a marriage is not unusual. He arrived healthy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a strong cry, good color, and came home with us 3 days later. He grew into a quiet child, not withdrawn, he had friends, he participated in things, but fundamentally interior. He preferred focused solitary activity to group chaos. He liked building things from the beginning, block towers first, then progressively more complex Lego sets, then model kits, then, by the time he was 7, the Technic line with its actual mechanical systems, gears and axles and levers that did things. He would sit with an instruction booklet and work through a 400-piece set with the concentration I recognized in myself. Not impatience exactly, more like the quality of attention that excludes everything else until the task is resolved. My wife used to say he got that from me. I accepted that attribution without examining it. He had dark brown hair and olive skin. He had her laugh, a real laugh, the kind that comes out of the whole body. He had her social ease with adults, which was not something I had modeled for him. He was, in the composite picture, a child who could have belonged to either of us or to both. Children often don't look like their parents. Children who look exactly like one parent are a joke people make. I did not spend time on this question. The first thing I noted and filed happened when he was 4 years old. He had a minor umbilical hernia that had not resolved on its own by his 3rd birthday and was scheduled for a straightforward surgical repair. Standard preoperative workup, complete blood count, basic metabolic panel, type and screen. The results were unremarkable across the board. He was healthy, well-nourished, normal counts, normal chemistry. His blood type came back, O positive. I am type I positive. My wife is type A positive. I know this because we had our blood types in our medical records and because it is the kind of data point I tend to retain. I looked at the result for approximately 4 seconds. 2a. Positive parents can produce an O positive child only if both parents carry a recessive O allele at the abo locus, meaning both parents are genetically AO rather than AA. This is possible. The frequency of the O allele in the population is high enough that 2 AL genotype of positive parents is not a rare combination. The probability of 2A parents producing an O positive child is approximately 25%. This is not impossible. It is not even particularly uncommon. I noted it. I moved on. I filed it in the part of my mind where I keep things that are statistically explicable but worth a notation. This is what I do professionally, with findings that could be benign variants or could be something else. You note them. You keep them in context. You watch for convergent data. The second thing I noted and filed happened in the summer before he turned 7. We were at a late July barbecue hosted by her college friends. A couple she had known since undergraduate, people I liked reasonably well, the kind of friends who remember your birthday because they are people who remember birthdays. There were perhaps 15 people there, in the backyard of a house in a suburb 40 minutes from ours. The kind of gathering where children run freely and adults stand in loose clusters near the food. The husband of my wife's college roommate was talking. He was a talker, an affable man who filled silence easily and without aggression, about how their youngest daughter had her grandfather's jaw. He said, with the warm specificity of someone who has told this story before, "It just skips a generation sometimes. Grandpa had it, my brother had it, she's got it." My wife laughed, which she did easily and often at social gatherings. She gestured toward our son, who was crouched in the grass at the edge of the yard examining something in the dirt, an anthill, I later determined, with the complete concentrated attention he brought to anything interesting. She said, "He gets the builder thing from his father's side." I was standing approximately 3 feet to her left. She did not say, "your side." She said, his father's side. And then, not immediately, but within half a second, the kind of lag that is not visible unless you are watching for it, she looked at me and added, "Your dad was an engineer, right? That whole engineering gene." I confirmed that yes, my father had been a civil engineer. He had worked for a state for 30 years and had a particular love for bridge infrastructure that he had passed on to me as a general enthusiasm for systems and how they worked. The conversation moved on. My wife refilled her drink. I talked to someone about a baseball team. I noted the phrasing. I noted the slight additional clause, "Your dad was an engineer, right?" which functioned, syntactically, as an explanation for a sentence that had not required one. You do not explain what you said unless some part of you knows it needed explaining. I filed it. I did not open the file. I want to be careful here about what I am claiming and what I am not. I am not claiming I knew. I am claiming I had data. There is a significant difference between having data that could support a conclusion and having reached that conclusion. I had not reached it. The file existed. I had not opened it. In my professional life, I know that premature pattern closing is a diagnostic error. You see what you're looking for because you've already decided what's there. I did not want to be that pathologist in my own life. I did not look. This is, I think, what people mean when they call me cold. They mean I am capable of having information and not acting on it reflexively. They mean I do not run toward the fire. What they don't understand is that the discipline that keeps me from running toward the fire is the same discipline that, when the situation finally requires action, makes the action clean and complete and without collateral damage. My son was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in the second week of October, 5 weeks after his 8th birthday. The school nurse called first. She had noticed a bruising pattern on his forearms and shins, not the random bruising of an active child, but the clustering and fading at different rates pattern of impaired platelet function. And she had noted his pallor over the previous 3 weeks, and the way he had started coming to the nurse's station after lunch with what he described as stomach aches, but which may have been, she said carefully, hepatosplenomegaly, making his abdomen feel heavy after eating. She called my wife. My wife called me. I drove to the pediatrician's office already knowing, in the specific way I know things after 15 years of reading what blood does, what the labs would show. I knew before the count came back. I knew from the nurse's description. The differential on his peripheral smear, which I reviewed myself that afternoon through a professional courtesy arrangement with the hospital lab, showed the lymphoblast population clearly. Medium-sized cells with high nucleus to cytoplasm ratios, finely dispersed chromatin, 1 to 2 small nucleoli. B-cell precursor all, most likely. Standard risk. Pending cytogenetics. I sat with this information in my car in the hospital parking garage for 6 minutes before going back upstairs to where my wife was with my son. He had a bag of animal crackers and was sorting them by type on the waiting room chair beside him. Lions in one group, elephants in another. He looked up when I came in and said, "Did you find out what it is?" I said, "Your blood is doing something it shouldn't. We're going to fix it." He considered this. He put a giraffe in the elephant group, apparently deciding that category worked. He said, "Does fixing it hurt?" I said, "Some parts of it do. We're going to be with you the whole time." He nodded and went back to his crackers. We enrolled him in the children's oncology program at the affiliated children's hospital within the week. His oncologist was a woman I had worked with on multidisciplinary tumor boards for 6 years. She was precise, direct, did not use softening language when the information did not warrant softening, and did not dramatize information when the clinical picture was actually better than parents feared. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of physician I would have chosen for someone I loved. The diagnosis was confirmed. B-cell precursor all, high hyperdiploidy on cytogenetics, which is actually the most favorable prognostic subtype. His initial stratification was standard risk. The treatment protocol was a three-phase approach: induction, consolidation, maintenance, following the current COG, ALL0434 backbone. He would be on treatment for approximately 2.5 years total if everything went as expected. My wife asked, at the initial family meeting, whether he would lose his hair. His oncologist said yes. During induction, almost certainly. My wife teared up. I noted this, not critically. It was a normal response to an abnormal situation. I was managing my own response, which was the kind of response that has no visible surface manifestation, which does not mean it doesn't exist. He began induction chemotherapy 11 days after diagnosis. He tolerated it with the same steady, interior quality he brought to everything. He was nauseated. He was tired. He lost 17 pounds in 8 weeks and then stabilized. He lost his hair in week 4 and examined his bald head in the bathroom mirror with a scientific curiosity that made me, privately, deeply proud. He said it felt interesting and asked if he could see photos of what the hair follicles looked like under a microscope. And I found a good scanning electron microscopy image and explained the structure. He asked, "Will they all grow back?" I said, "Yes, exactly like before." He seemed satisfied with this answer. He went back to his Lego set. 4 months into treatment, at the monthly oncology review, his oncologist asked me to come in slightly early. She told me that the day 29 minimal residual disease assessment had been favorable. MRD negative, which was the result you wanted, but that a repeat cytogenetic analysis had identified a secondary finding, a 9:22 translocation in a small subpopulation of blasts. BCR-ABL, 1 positive, by FISH confirmation. I said, "Philadelphia, chromosome." She said, "A small clone." It changes the risk category to high risk. It changes the treatment considerations. She watched me absorb this in the way clinicians watch other clinicians absorb clinical information. There was a specific quality to her attention that I recognized. She was assessing whether I was processing it as a physician or as a parent, and whether those two modes were going to be compatible in the room. I said, "You're raising transplant." She said, "I'm raising it as a planning conversation, not a decision. The current data suggests he may achieve a sustained remission on TKI-based therapy alone. But I want to begin HLA typing now so that if we need to move, we're not waiting on the workup." I said, "I want to be typed today if possible." She said, "I expected that." My blood was drawn at 3:47 p.m. in a phlebotomy chair on the 4th floor of the main building. The phlebotomist, a young man I had seen in the hallways but didn't know by name, was practiced and quick. 3 tubes. The HLA panel runs on DNA extracted from the white cells. Results in approximately 10 business days. I drove home and did not mention the transplant conversation to my wife because I had nothing actionable to report. I would tell her when there was something to tell. The results came back 11 days later. I need to describe what happened in the genetics counselor's office carefully, because the sequence of events in that room contains the real pivot of this story, and the sequence matters. The meeting was scheduled as a donor compatibility update on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:30. I had been told by the scheduling coordinator to come alone initially and that my wife would be called in for the full family consultation afterward. I did not read particular significance into this structure. Staging consultations is a standard approach for managing how information is delivered in high-stakes medical contexts. You give the most complex information to the most prepared recipient first, Then bring the rest of the family in for the integrated conversation. I had been in this genetics counselor's office before. We had served on the same IRB committee 2 years earlier for a clinical trial involving pediatric germline sequencing. She was rigorous and precise, and did not hedge when the data was clear. When I walked in, she was seated behind her desk, with her hands folded in front of her. Not on the keyboard, not reviewing papers, just hands folded, which in my experience of that posture means a person is actively waiting for someone rather than doing anything else. My son's oncologist was in a chair along the wall. There was a second chair pulled slightly back from the desk at an angle that had not been there when I had last been in this room. The chair placement read to me, as a behavioral adjustment, the physical equivalent of establishing a soft perimeter. I sat in the chair closest to the desk. The genetics counselor said, "I want to walk through these results carefully." I said, "Show me the table." She turned her laptop screen toward me. The HLA typing comparison report was formatted as a side-by-side table. My allele calls on the left, my son's on the right, across 14 loci. HLA A, B, C, DRB, 1, DQB, 1, and the extended panel. I read it in the way I read all laboratory data. Left to right. Systematically. Locus by locus. I am a hematopathologist. I interpret bone marrow transplant workups as part of my professional scope. I understand HLA haplotypes. I understand inheritance patterns. I understand that a child inherits one haplotype from each parent, and that a biologically related parent-child pair should share exactly one haplotype, a 50% match. I understand what a complete mismatch at multiple loci means. I understand probability matrices. I read the full table. I saw the mismatch at HLA. I saw the mismatch at HLA-B. I saw the mismatch at HLA-DRB1. I saw the mismatch at HLA-DQB1. I understood what I was seeing before I reached the summary statistics at the bottom. But I read to the bottom before I looked up. The probability of first-degree biological relationship between myself and my son was 0.003%. The genetics counselor and my son's oncologist were both looking at me. Neither of them spoke. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms get quiet when trained professionals are watching a person's face and trying to determine whether they need intervention. I looked at the genetics counselor. I looked at the oncologist. I said, "I see." That was the moment part 1 ended. The drive home from the hospital took 22 minutes. I know this because I noted the time I exited the parking garage, 5:14 p.m., the ticket stamped, and the time I turned off the engine in my driveway, 5:36 p.m. I drove the posted speed limit on every road. I stopped fully at every stop sign. I did not run a single light. I parked in my habitual position in the left bay of the garage, slightly forward of center to allow clearance for the shelving unit along the back wall. I sat in the car for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I know this because I noted the time when I decided to stop sitting and go inside. What I was doing during those 3 minutes and 40 seconds was not processing emotion. I want to be precise about this. I was completing an assessment. The situation had new parameters. I was updating the model. In pathology, when an initial assessment is contradicted by new data, you do not grieve the initial assessment. You revise the report. The revision is not the tragedy. The tragedy, if there is one, is whatever caused the discrepancy between the initial picture and the real one. The revision is just work. I walked inside. My wife was in the kitchen. She had a phone pressed to her shoulder, one of the vendor calls she took in the late afternoon, tracking down a florist or a caterer or a lighting rental company. She mouthed sorry and gestured that she'd be 1 minute. I waited. She finished the call, set the phone on the counter, turned to me, and said, "How did it go? Are you a match?" I looked at her for a moment. I said, "No." She made a sound, a small, disappointed exhalation, the sound of a person absorbing a setback they had been hoping to avoid. She said, "The registry." I said, "They'll run it." Then I went upstairs, changed out of my work clothes, and sat at my desk. What I am about to describe is the part of this account that people characterize as cold. I have heard this characterization enough times that I have developed a precise response to it, which I will deliver here once and not again. There is nothing cold about clarity. There is nothing cruel about doing necessary things in an orderly manner. What people are reacting to, when they call this cold, is the absence of visible suffering. They expect visible suffering to be the precondition for taking action. I do not operate that way. The action is how I manage the suffering. The action is how I keep moving. Every cancellation I made that night was a decision I could control in a situation where most things were not controllable. Methodical response to chaos is not pathology. It is coping. I opened my laptop at 5:49 p.m. Chase, joint checking account. My direct deposit from the hospital. $14,200 net per month, after federal and state tax withholding, health insurance premiums, and my 403(b) contribution, had been depositing into our joint Chase checking account for 8 years. I maintained a personal checking account at the same bank, one I had opened during residency and never closed, which my wife had not been added to and which I had used, periodically, for professional expenses that I preferred to track separately. I navigated to the HR benefits and payroll portal for my institution. The direct deposit modification form required my employee ID, my bank routing and account numbers, and a signature from my department administrator, which could be submitted electronically. I completed the form, selected my personal checking account as the new deposit destination, and submitted it at 5:53 p.m. The change would take effect on the next pay cycle, which was 11 days away. Chase joint savings account. Current balance, $43,418.07. I transferred exactly half, $21,709.03, to my personal savings account. The transfer cleared instantly. I did not transfer more than half. I left the remainder intact and accessible. Chase joint credit card. Current balance, $4,102.49. Credit limit, $22,000. The card was in both names, used primarily for household expenses, groceries, utilities, my son's school activity fees, home maintenance. I initiated a request to remove my name from the account, converting it to a solo account in my wife's name. The bank's processing time for this request, 7 to 10 business days. In the meantime, the card remained active for both users. I noted this and made a corresponding note to my attorney. American Express Platinum. This card was in my name only, with my wife as an authorized user. I had opened it 12 years ago, before the marriage, for work travel expenses. She had been added as a user 4 years into the marriage. The current billing cycle showed a balance of $1,847, roughly half of which was her charges. I logged in and removed her as an authorized user. The removal was immediate. Her card was deactivated at 6:04 p.m. I noted the current balance and flagged it for the asset disclosure process. Subscriptions and shared services. I want to describe these in sequence because the specificity matters. Streaming services is not a phrase that conveys what this actually is. What this actually is every small invisible tether that builds up over years of shared domestic life and which, until you go through the process of undoing them one by one, you don't fully perceive. Netflix. Our account was registered under my email address on my payment method. I changed the payment method from the joint Chase card to my American Express Platinum. I removed my wife's profile from the account. There were 4 profiles: mine, hers, my son's, with parental controls, and one labeled guest that appeared to get occasional use. I removed hers. I left the other 3. Spotify family plan. In my name, $16.99 per month, covering my wife, her sister, and a college friend who had been on the plan for 3 years and whose presence I had simply accepted as a given. I removed all 3 secondary users and downgraded the plan to Spotify Premium Individual at $11.99 per month. Monthly savings, $5. I noted this not for its financial significance, which was negligible, but because the sister's name appearing in the removal confirmation would reach my wife faster than anything else that evening. Amazon Prime. Account under my email. I removed my wife's household membership access. She would lose free shipping, Prime Video access, and the household payment privileges immediately. I did not cancel the account. HBO Max. Account registered under my wife's email, billed to the joint Chase card. When the Chase card transferred to her sole name processed in 7 to 10 business days, the payment method on file would be the card in her name, so the subscription would continue on her account billed to her card. No immediate action needed from me. I noted it. Hulu. Account in my name, billed to the joint Chase card. I transferred payment to my Amex and removed my wife's profile. Apple One family. In my name, $21.95 per month. This plan covered Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, Apple Arcade, and the 200 gigabytes iCloud family storage that both my wife and I used. I removed my wife from the family sharing group at 6:18 p.m. This terminated her access to all 4 services simultaneously and removed her from the shared iCloud storage pool. She had used approximately 67 gigabytes. Her photos, documents, and backups remained in her individual iCloud account. The data itself was not lost, but the shared storage expansion was. She would receive a storage over limit notification within 24 hours. The New York Times. Digital all-access subscription in my name, billed to the Chase card. I transferred the billing to my Amex and removed the secondary account under her email. YMCA dual household membership. $89 per month covering both of us. I called the member services line at 6:22 p.m. The wait time was 6 minutes. I gave my member number, confirmed my identity, and downgraded to an individual membership at $47 per month. The representative asked if I wanted to remove a specific member or change the membership type. I said change the membership type to individual. The representative said sure and processed it. ADT Home Security. The account was in my wife's name, on file with the joint Chase card as payment. When the card ownership transferred, the billing would fail and the account would lapse to a grace period, after which the monitoring service would suspend unless she updated payment. I noted it. Comcast Home Internet. In my name, on the joint Chase card. I transferred billing to my Amex. No other changes. Sirius XM. My car, my name, no changes. Dropbox Business. I had maintained this account for approximately 5 years, using it to store household administrative documents, tax returns going back 7 years, insurance policy documents, my son's medical records scanned into organized folders, the deed to the house, vehicle titles, warranty documents. I had invited my wife to the shared workspace 3 years ago so she could access documents she needed for the event business and for household administration. I opened the Dropbox account at 6:31 p.m. I downloaded the entire shared workspace to my local drive, 14.3 gigabytes, using the desktop client. The download took 19 minutes on our home internet connection. While it was downloading, I continued on other items. When it finished, I created a new shared folder called Her Documents, containing all the files I had identified as hers or jointly relevant, her business contracts, vendor lists, the insurance policies in her name, several years of her business tax filings. I generated a sharing link and emailed it to her address at 6:54 p.m. with a subject line that said, Dropbox access. No body text. The email contained the link and nothing else. She would have 30 days to download before I removed her access entirely. I removed her access to the main workspace at 6:55 p.m. Finished at 9:17 p.m. Sat for a moment in the quiet of my study. The house had been silent for the past hour. My wife had, at some point, gone to the other side of the house. I could hear the television at low volume through the floor. I went to my son's room. He was in bed, but not yet asleep, working on the instruction booklet for a Technic set he had been planning to build. He was at the stage where he reads the entire booklet before beginning, something he had started doing on his own, without being taught. He looked up when I came in. I sat on the edge of his bed. I asked him if he wanted me to read. He said yes. His current chapter book was about a 12-year-old boy who inherits responsibility for a lighthouse on the Maine coast after his grandfather's death. I read 2 pages. My son's breathing slowed on the second page. I read the 3rd page anyway, quietly, and set the book on his nightstand with the bookmark at the correct page. My attorney agreed to see me at 8 a.m. the following morning. He was an estate and family law attorney I had used years earlier for probate matters after my father died. When I had called him the previous evening at 5:52 p.m., between sitting in the car and going inside, I had not left a detailed message. I said I needed to discuss a family matter and asked him to call back when he had a moment. He called back within 9 minutes. I summarized the situation in approximately 3 minutes. He was quiet for a moment, and then said he could see me at 8 o'clock the following morning at his office. I brought the HLA typing comparison report, printed, in a manila folder. I also brought a single page of notes I had made the previous evening, a timeline of the marriage, the birth, and the relevant observations I had accumulated and filed. I was not presenting a case. I was providing context. He reviewed the HLA report. He said, "This will need to be confirmed with the standard paternity test for any legal proceeding." I said, "I know. Request it as part of discovery." He said, "We'll request it as part of initial disclosure. It's cleaner." He explained the basic structure of what would follow: the petition for dissolution, the mandatory disclosure period, the required waiting period in our jurisdiction, the process for asset identification and division, and the question of the primary residence during the proceedings. He noted that, in his experience, retaining the family home and having my wife relocate was often contested, but ultimately determinable if I wished to remain in the property. I said I did not wish to contest her residence there for the duration of the proceedings. It would be more stable for my son to have his primary home remain his primary home. My attorney noted this. He said, "That's generous, given the circumstances." I said, "It's not generosity, it's logistics." The divorce petition was filed 4 days later. I was at work when the process server came. My attorney had timed the service for a weekday morning when I would reliably not be home. The confirmation came to my attorney's office and was forwarded to me at 11:19 a.m. I was in a tumor board meeting for the thoracic oncology service. I noted the confirmation text and returned my attention to the meeting. My wife called my cell 6 times between 11:20 and 11:48 a.m. Each call went to voicemail. After the 6th call, she sent a text. "You need to call me right now. This has to be a mistake." I did not respond. Over the next 2 hours, 4 more texts arrived. They escalated in urgency and, in the final one, in a particular phrase that I noted. Whatever I did, we can talk about this. I flagged this phrase in a note to my attorney. The phrasing, whatever I did, is not the phrasing of a person who does not know what they did. It is the phrasing of a person who is negotiating the cost of what they did before the terms have been named. It is a useful distinction. When I came home that evening, my wife was in the living room with her phone in her hand and a face that had been reconfigured by several hours of stress. She said, "What is going on?" "I have been trying to reach you all day." A man came to the door with, I said, "I know." She said, "What does that mean?" "Why are you?" I said. "You know why." She said, "I don't. I genuinely don't." "If this is about the compatibility test," I said, "I'm going to sleep in the guest room while the legal process runs." I went upstairs. She stood in the hallway at the foot of the stairs and spoke toward the closed guest room door for approximately 4 minutes. I sat on the guest room bed with my back against the headboard and listened to the rhythm of her voice, not the content, not the words, just the sound of it moving through the door. In the way you sit with any background signal that requires no response. The next morning, I was up at 5:45. I made coffee. She was not yet awake. I drove to work in the pre-dawn quiet and arrived 40 minutes before my first case. The divorce petition cited irreconcilable differences. My attorney's recommendation was to keep the initial filing clean, a standard, non-accusatory framing, and allow the subsequent legal process to develop the specific facts. A specific allegation of infidelity or fraud was not necessary at the petition stage. The DNA test, requested as part of discovery, would establish the factual foundation for the relevant legal arguments without requiring me to make inflammatory claims in the initial paperwork. Her attorney entered the case within 4 days of service. His name was known to my attorney, who described him as aggressive and somewhat theatrical. I noted this as useful information. Theatrical attorneys tend to front-load their leverage, and when the dramatic postures fail to achieve their intended effect, tend to recalibrate more slowly than methodical ones. What followed over the next 6 weeks was a sequence of approaches. I will describe them in the order they occurred, because the order reveals something about the strategy behind them. Approach 1. Rewriting the premise. The first formal communication from her attorney was a letter sent to my attorney in week 2. The letter argued, in 4 paragraphs, that I had misinterpreted the HLA typing results in a manner consistent with professional tunnel vision, and that the results were scientifically inconclusive as to any question of biological parentage pending formal genetic testing. The letter cited a published case study from a 2014 journal article describing a confirmed parent-child pair in which an unusual HLA mismatch pattern had been attributed to a somatic mutation event. The case study cited was real. The article was legitimate. The scenario described, a de novo mutation creating an apparent HLA discordance in a biological parent-child pair, appears in the literature. It is real. It happens. It happens at a frequency of approximately 1 in 800,000. The probability of biological paternity in my son's full extended HLA panel was 0.003%, which translates to roughly 1 in 33,000 odds against. These two numbers do not contradict each other. A statistical outlier remains a statistical outlier at any frequency. The letter was citing a real phenomenon to create a reasonable doubt framework in the hope that I would hesitate. I do not hesitate in the presence of a clear result while waiting for a lawyer to find a case study. I forwarded the letter to my attorney with 4 words in the body of my email. "We'll wait for DNA." My attorney responded to her attorney with 2 sentences confirming that the parties would await the court-requested DNA analysis. My wife called me 8 times over the following 5 days. I answered twice. First call. She said the genetics counselor had made an error, that she had spoken to her own doctor who confirmed that HLA results were not valid paternity evidence. I said, the DNA test will settle it. I hung up. Second call. She was crying in a controlled way, the kind of crying that is partially performed for an audience, which is not the same as saying the emotion is false, only that it is being deployed. She said she could explain everything. I said, explain it to your attorney. I hung up. The remaining 6 calls went to voicemail over the following 3 days. I did not listen to any of them for 11 days. When I finally did, I played each one on my laptop with a legal pad next to me and transcribed any factual statement or legally relevant claim into a document. There were none. The content was emotional and repetitive. I forwarded the document to my attorney noting this. Approach 2. The sick child. In week 3, my wife's mother called me. I want to be precise about my relationship with my mother-in-law before describing this call, because the precision matters. She was not a manipulative person in the strategic sense. She was a person of genuine warmth who had organized her emotional world around her daughter's well-being and who believed, with complete sincerity, that her daughter's comfort was a legitimate priority around which other people should orient their behavior. She was also, in the particular way of people who have always been loved by everyone, not entirely accustomed to encountering situations that didn't respond to appeals to decency. She said, I know you two are going through something very difficult. But that little boy is sick. He needs his family to be together right now. I said, his treatment plan has not changed. I attend every oncology appointment. His oncologist has my direct number. She said, he doesn't just need his treatments. He needs to feel his family is okay. I said, he sees me every morning and every evening. I'm in the guest room, not in another city. She said, you know that's not the same. I said, we are managing the household calmly. She said, are you? Because my daughter is not calm. And children feel that. I said, children also feel when adults are being dishonest with them. I'm managing what I can manage. There was a pause. Then she said, you're being very cold. I said, I understand that's how it seems. She called twice more over the following 2 weeks. I answered once and heard a similar version of the same argument. The second call I let go to voicemail, listened to it, noted the content, and did not return it. Approach 3. Social narrative. My wife was an event planner with an active and extensive social network. She was, by both training and inclination, a person who understood that perception is a form of currency and managed it accordingly. I was aware of this. I had watched her manage perception on behalf of clients for 11 years. I knew what it looked like when she deployed that skill. In week 4, a mutual acquaintance, a man my wife and I had known through our neighborhood association, someone we had attended 3 or 4 events with over the years, someone I would describe as a social contact rather than a friend, sent me a text. It said he had heard that I was stepping back from the family during our son's illness, and that he was worried and hoped I would think carefully about what my son needs right now. I texted back, my son's treatment and care are ongoing, and I am present for all of it. I'm at every appointment. He replied, that's not what I heard. I said, I understand. I did not say anything further. I noted him. Over the following 10 days, I received 2 similar texts and 1 in-person encounter at the grocery store. A woman from our school's parent association who expressed, with visible discomfort, that she had heard I was going through something and that she hoped I knew that my son needed me to be fully present. I thanked her for her concern and said my son was receiving excellent care. I did not explain further. Each of these contacts had received, through my wife's network, some version of a narrative in which I had discovered a piece of information about my wife, used it as a pretext to exit the marriage in the middle of our son's cancer treatment, and had left a sick child without a father. The narrative was coherent. It was distributed through relationships my wife had maintained with real effort over many years. It landed because people who trust the distributor do not automatically interrogate the content. I did not issue corrections. I noted the people who reached out. I noted the people who didn't. The first foreshadowing detail from Part 1 paid off in Week 5 of the proceedings. Discovery had been initiated. My attorney had issued requests for financial documentation, communication records, and a comprehensive timeline of events relevant to the paternity question. In response, her attorney produced an affidavit from my wife. The affidavit argued that any apparent inconsistency in the paternity question stemmed from a brief relationship she had maintained prior to the marriage, which she had believed had concluded before the relevant conception period. The affidavit used the phrase, "She believed in good faith that the child was her husband's biological child at the time of the birth and throughout the marriage." I read this sentence carefully. Good faith is a legal concept with real weight in certain asset division and fraud determinations. If a court found that my wife had genuinely not known, that she had been sufficiently uncertain about the timing of her prior relationship to have plausibly believed the child was mine, the legal implications around the marriage itself would be different from a situation where she had known with certainty and concealed it. I wrote a memo to my attorney. I cited the barbecue. I cited the specific sentence, "He gets the builder thing from his father's side." I cited the timing lag before she named my father's profession as the explanation. I noted that this phrasing, "his father's side, not your side," was inconsistent with the affidavit's claim that she had believed I was the biological father throughout the marriage. I also noted that the word "believed" in the affidavit was doing significant work. She believed in good faith is not the same as she did not know. It is carefully constructed not to make the stronger claim. My attorney flagged this memo as significant and incorporated it into the discovery response. The second foreshadowing detail, the O-positive blood type I had noted when my son was 4, paid off in Week 6. The court-ordered DNA test was processed by a certified genetics laboratory appointed by the court. The report arrived simultaneously to both attorneys and to the court. The probability of biological paternity was 0.00%. Not the HLA results 0.003%. 0. The full STR analysis was unambiguous. The laboratory report also included, as part of the standard analytical suite, a partial allele profile comparison against the state genetic database, a database that contains voluntary submissions from ancestry testing services that have enrolled in the program, as well as certain criminal justice entries and medical registry contributions. This database search is standard, used primarily to identify potential donors or relatives in transplant cases, which was the original framing of our entire testing process. The partial match analysis flagged a potential first-degree relative match. The profile belonged to a man who was identifiable through the legal channels my attorney had access to, in the context of the proceedings. I will not describe who he was, or what his connection to my wife's history was, beyond what is relevant. He was not a stranger to her. He was a person from her past who had remained, in some form, in her orbit. My attorney handled the legal notification. His own attorney, whom he retained within the week, handled his response separately and outside my proceedings. What I will say is this: the existence of a specific identifiable person removed the last possible interpretation of my wife's situation as a tragic unknowing error. The DNA profile in the state database does not belong to a one-night accident. It belongs to a person with a name and a history and a connection. The affidavit's language about a brief relationship that she believed had concluded became considerably less persuasive in the light of a partial profile match in a database that requires active enrollment. My attorney noted this. The calls from my wife stopped the day after the DNA results were transmitted to both attorneys. Approach 4. Legal threat regarding my son. Her attorney sent a letter in week 7. The letter was 4 pages. It argued, at length, that I had a legal obligation to continue full financial support of my son, regardless of the biological paternity determination, because I had functioned as his psychological and legal father for 8 years, had allowed my name to appear on his birth certificate, had represented myself as his father in all social, educational, and medical contexts, and was therefore bound by the doctrine of equitable parentage and, in our state's case law, the related concept of parentage by estoppel. The letter cited statutes from 3 states, 2 of which were not ours. The in-state citation was a 2009 appellate decision that did support equitable parentage in cases where a man had acted as a father for a sustained period. I read the letter at my desk on a Tuesday evening. I read the cited case. The case was accurately cited, and the legal doctrine was real. I also noted that the letter appeared to have been written under the assumption that I was planning to reduce or eliminate financial and practical support for my son, that I would use the biological paternity revelation as a reason to exit the child's life. I sent my attorney a single paragraph. I intend to continue full financial support for my son. I intend to remain involved in his medical care and daily life. This is not contingent on the biological question, and I would like her attorney to be clearly and formally informed of this. Please ensure that the record reflects that I have never indicated otherwise. My attorney communicated this in a response to her attorney within 24 hours. The legal threat, having found no purchase, was not repeated. I want to say something directly about this, because it is the part of this story that some people get wrong when they tell it back to me. My son had a name. He had a room full of Lego sets and a chapter book on his nightstand, and a particular way of sorting things by type before beginning to work with them. He had a bone marrow transplant scheduled. He had been through 4 months of chemotherapy with a steady, interior kind of endurance that I watched with genuine awe. He called me at work on a Tuesday afternoon when he finished a particularly hard model and said, "I need you to come see this when you get home," and I rearranged 2 meetings. None of that changed. Not one item of it. What changed was my willingness to share a life and a bed and a financial future with the person who had built the foundational premise of our marriage on a decision to deceive me. Those are not the same thing. My wife seemed to believe they were the same thing. Her attorney seemed to believe I could be reminded that they were the same thing. I could not be reminded of something that was not true. Approach 5. The hospital. This was the approach that required the most careful and precise response. In week 7, a person tangentially connected to my institution, a woman who served on a hospital auxiliary board and who knew my wife through the nonprofit event circuit, mentioned to someone in hospital administration that she had heard I was going through something serious and that she was concerned about whether he was okay to be working at that level. This reached my department chair through the informal channel by which most institutional gossip travels. He called me into his office on a Thursday morning. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. I had prepared for the possibility of this meeting since week 2. I brought a folder containing 4 items: the HLA typing report, with a 1-paragraph explanatory note I had written summarizing the statistical significance, the DNA test result, my son's current oncology treatment summary with the appointment attendance log that my son's oncologist's office maintained, and a 1-page factual timeline of events. I did not characterize my wife. I did not use emotional language. I described the sequence of events in the order they occurred and showed the documentation that supported each point. My department chair read through the folder without speaking. He spent additional time on the DNA result. He asked 2 clarifying questions, one about the process by which the HLA test had been administered, One about the current status of the legal proceedings. I answered both. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at me for a moment. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am functioning at full capacity." He said, "That's not what I asked." I said, "I know. Yes, I'm okay." He said, "Is your son okay?" I said, "His day 100 assessment post-transplant is in 3 weeks. His early engraftment markers are encouraging." He nodded slowly. He said, "Close the door on your way out." No further institutional action was taken. No performance review was initiated. No request for a leave of absence was made. The rumor, having found no evidence to support it, and having been presented with an organized folder of documentation that would be inconvenient to challenge, did not persist. I have thought about this approach more than the others, because it was the most sophisticated. All the other approaches were aimed at me directly, at my emotions, my guilt, my legal exposure. This one was aimed at the institutional apparatus around me. My wife, or someone advising her, understood that the thing most likely to destabilize a person whose power comes from competence and precision is a threat to the professional environment in which that competence operates. It did not work because I had already prepared the folder. The divorce was finalized 7 months and 3 weeks after the initial petition was filed. This is, by the standards of contested divorces in our jurisdiction, a fast resolution. I attribute the speed primarily to 2 factors: my attorney's methodical and complete documentation of the financial landscape, which left her attorney little room to manufacture ambiguity, and the gradual collapse, over the course of the proceedings, of the narrative architecture my wife had built. When the narrative collapses in a legal proceeding, the practical negotiating position collapses with it. Her attorney had opened with an aggressive posture. By week 12, the posture had become a more moderate negotiating approach. By week 18, the approach had become primarily defensive. The settlement terms were as follows. The house was sold. We had purchased it 9 years earlier for $580,000. The sale price was $1,140,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance of $287,000, the standard 6% combined realtor commission of $68,400, closing costs of approximately $11,500, and minor repair expenses agreed upon during sale preparation, the net equity available for division was approximately $673,100. The court divided this equity 55-45 in my favor. The adjustment from an even 50-50 split reflected the court's finding on the good faith question, specifically, the documentation my attorney had presented regarding my wife's knowledge that the biological paternity was in question, including the transcribed barbecue incident and the careful language of the affidavit. A court finding that one party's material misrepresentation during the marriage influenced the other party's financial and personal decisions is relevant to equitable distribution in our state. Her attorney filed a motion to reconsider the 55-45 split. The motion was denied. The Fidelity joint brokerage account was divided evenly. My individual retirement accounts, a 403(b), and a Roth IRA, both predating the marriage by several years, were excluded from the marital estate. My wife's attorney challenged the exclusion of the 403(b) on the grounds that contributions during the marriage had added to its value. The court allowed a partial marital component calculation on the marriage period contributions only. This reduced my exclusion slightly. I had expected this and had not structured my argument around an expectation of full exclusion. Spousal support, the term our jurisdiction uses rather than alimony, was set at a monthly figure below what her attorney had initially sought. The reduction from the request reflected 2 factors. The first was the court's recognition that my wife operated a business generating income that her initial financial affidavit had understated. The second was that the understated income had been documented by my attorney through bank records obtained in discovery, and this documentation had been presented to the court. Misrepresentation in financial disclosures carries weight with judges. Her attorney characterized the support award as a temporary provision and expressed his client's intention to request modification once the business recovered. My attorney noted this for the record. The biological father. I want to address this separately because it is the part of this narrative that people most often ask about, and the part where my role was smallest and least relevant. The DNA database match established identity through legal channels and was communicated to the relevant parties, his attorney and my attorney, in parallel. He had not known. I am reasonably confident of this, not because I have any particular basis for charitable interpretation of the situation, but because the legal process generated enough documentation of the relevant communications and timelines that the probability of his non-knowledge was assessed and found plausible by my attorney. His response, as conveyed to my attorney, was that of a person who had received information that had restructured a significant portion of his recent history without his participation. He retained an attorney. The legal matters pertaining to him, his rights, his obligations, his potential relationship with my son, were handled entirely separately from my divorce proceedings and were not my responsibility to navigate. My attorney advised me, once, that I might be asked to participate in some aspect of the legal process determining his parental status. I said, whatever the legal process requires. I was not asked. What I can say is that my son's oncologist was aware of the full situation. She had been made aware during the donor search process and the subsequent DNA testing, as the transplant workup had generated the original data, and that she managed the medical information with the same precision she managed everything else. The transplant had proceeded on the timeline it was on. The biological father was typed. He was not a match for transplant purposes. This was clinically irrelevant by the time it was confirmed, because the unrelated donor had already been identified and the transplant performed. But the typing happened, and the result was what it was, and it closed a door that had been briefly open. The transplant. I have mentioned it in pieces across this account, and I want to give it the full description it deserves, because the transplant is the center of the story in a way that the legal proceedings are not. The National Marrow Donor Program search identified 2 potential matched unrelated donors within 8 weeks of the registry submission. Both were 9/10 HLA matches. A cord blood unit was also identified as a third option. The transplant team, after confirmatory typing and detailed comparison of the 2 unrelated donors, selected the better match for the conditioning and transplant protocol. The donor is anonymous to us. I know nothing about them except that their marrow was healthy and compatible, and that they agreed to donate it to a child they had never met. The conditioning regimen began on a Tuesday. My son was admitted to the transplant unit the previous Sunday to begin 4 hydration and monitoring. I arranged 2 weeks of leave from work. I spoke to my department administrator about managing my cases during that period and designated a colleague to cover the urgent consultations. I slept in the hospital for 12 of the 31 nights of the admission. The hospital had a family sleep room on the transplant unit floor, a small room with a narrow bed and a window that faced a parking structure, and I used it when my son's condition warranted my proximity and when I had calculated that I could be more useful present than rested at home. On the other nights, I drove home, slept 6 hours, and drove back. I read to him every night I was there. We finished the Lighthouse book in week 2 and started a new one, a novel about a boy who discovers a system of underground tunnels beneath his town and maps them. He liked the mapping aspect. He asked me, on day 9 of the admission, whether I thought tunnels ever went places that weren't on maps. I said I thought the most interesting places usually weren't on any maps yet, because maps are made after exploration, not before. He considered this. He said, So you have to go first and then the map comes later. I said that was exactly right. He was discharged 31 days post-infusion. His day 14 engraftment had shown donor chimerism at 94%. His day 28 assessment showed complete donor chimerism at 98%. His neutrophil count had recovered on schedule. His oncologist used the phrase, "excellent early engraftment" in the discharge summary. I drove him home. He asked to stop at a drive-thru. He said he wanted French fries. I pulled into the drive-thru and ordered the largest size. He ate 7 fries in the car, holding each one up and examining it briefly before eating it. In the methodical way he examined everything. Then he said he was done. He fell asleep before we reached the house. I carried him inside and put him to bed and sat in the chair in his room for 20 minutes in the dark. The day 100 assessment showed full donor chimerism and no evidence of disease. His oncologist, who does not use language imprecisely, said his early trajectory was very encouraging. My wife moved into an apartment 12 minutes from the house while the property was still on the market. A 2-bedroom unit in a building near the town center, which I noted was close to several of the clients she had long-standing relationships with. We communicated exclusively through our Family Wizard, the co-parenting communication app that timestamps and logs all messages. We had no other direct communication. I had not initiated any. She had initiated 2, both of which were factual questions about my son's medical appointments. I answered them within the hour. The house sold 6 weeks after listing. The closing was handled by the attorneys. I did not need to see my wife at the closing because we each signed our documents separately, on different days, which my attorney had arranged. I moved into a rental house 3 miles from the original property. It had a 2nd bedroom where my son's Lego sets lived, transported carefully in their labeled boxes. He set them up himself over a weekend, organizing them by theme on the shelves in the order he wanted. He spent 2 hours on this organization task before he was satisfied. When he finished, he called me in to inspect the arrangement. I inspected it. I said, "That's well organized." He said, "I put them in order of complexity. Easiest to hardest." I said, "Good system." He said, "That's how you organize things, right? By complexity?" I said, "That's one way." He nodded and went to get a glass of water. There was one final contact from my wife that I want to describe, because it was, in its way, the clearest summary of her misunderstanding of me. It came 4 weeks after the divorce was finalized. A text, sent at 11:34 p.m., which I noted as a time of day associated with decisions made after the more rational social hours have passed. It said, "I know you think you understand exactly what happened and why. You don't." I read it. I set my phone on the nightstand. I did not respond that night. I did not respond the following morning. I did not respond at all. I want to explain why, because the silence is not what it might appear to be. She was not offering information. She was not correcting a factual error. She was opening a door, creating a question, an ambiguity, a gap in my understanding that she believed I would feel compelled to fill. She was applying a technique that had worked on me before, for 11 years, in various forms. The implication of hidden depth, the suggestion that there was a layer of her I hadn't accessed yet, that the real explanation lived just behind a door she was holding slightly ajar. I had spent 11 years walking through those doors. I knew what was behind them. More doors. I had the DNA result. I had the financial records. I had the partial profile match. I had the barbecue. I had the word believed. I had, in other words, a complete picture. Not because I had investigated aggressively, but because the investigation that had been required in the legal process had produced a picture that was complete. The text was not adding information to the picture. It was asking me to believe the picture was incomplete. The arithmetic was closed. What happened to my wife in the period following the divorce was not engineered by me. I want to establish that clearly before I describe it. She lost 3 clients in the 6 months after the divorce was finalized. 2 were corporate accounts she had managed for 4 and 6 years respectively. The third was the nonprofit gala she had organized for 4 consecutive years, the one that had been, arguably, her flagship account, the one she referenced in her portfolio, the one that had generated several of her other referrals. None of the clients cited her personal situation. Clients do not generally cite personal situations in their communications. They cite scheduling conflicts, budget reconsiderations, decisions to go in a different direction. What I can observe, from the outside, is the following. Event planning is a relationship business. The quality of the relationships is the product. My wife had used her relationship network, actively, repeatedly, over the course of the previous several months, to distribute a narrative that was demonstrably false and that had been publicly contradicted by legal proceedings that entered the public record in a court filing. A DNA test result in a dissolution proceeding is not sealed information in our jurisdiction. It is documented. People in her network were sophisticated people. They were people who organized galas and corporate retreats and political fundraisers. They read the available information. They updated their assessment of the reliability of the person at the center of that information. They made decisions about professional relationships based on their updated assessments. This is not punishment. This is how reputations work. Reputations are the accumulated ledger of how reliably a person's representations about themselves and others match observable reality. When a significant portion of the ledger is found to be falsified, the ledger value decreases. This is not cruelty. This is accounting. I did not call her clients. I did not speak to anyone in her professional network. I spoke to exactly 2 people in our shared social network, and in both cases I stated, plainly and without embellishment, that the accounts they had received were inaccurate and that the legal record was available if they wanted the factual version. I did not ask them to do anything with this information. I offered a correction and moved on. What they did with the correction was their business. My son turns 9 in March. He is in school 4 days a week now, building back. His immune system is in the gradual recovery phase that follows transplant, which means we are careful about exposure and vigilant about signs of complications. His oncologist says his trajectory continues to be encouraging. She uses that word with a precision I respect. She does not say excellent when the picture is still developing, and she does not say concerning when it isn't. She says encouraging, and she means it precisely. He is back to his builds. Last weekend he completed a 1,500-piece medieval castle set. The detailed one with the working drawbridge mechanism and the multiple interior levels. He had laid out all the numbered bags in sequence before starting. He worked for 4 hours on Saturday and 3 on Sunday, and he did not ask for help once, consulting the instruction booklet in the methodical way he always has, reading the full step before beginning any of its component actions. When he finished, he called me into the room. I looked at it for a long time. Every structural element placed correctly. The drawbridge mechanism functioning as designed. The towers symmetric. Not one compromise anywhere in the construction. He said, "Is it good?" I said, "It's exactly right." He nodded, satisfied, and went to get a glass of water. I have been asked, by her attorney, by her mother, by a school counselor who scheduled a check-in meeting with me in the 2nd month, by 2 or 3 mutual acquaintances who still reach out occasionally, how I could have been so calm throughout all of this. How I could have processed a revelation of that magnitude and moved through the administrative, legal, and medical dimensions of it without visible collapse. Some people ask this with genuine curiosity. Some ask it as an accusation, suggesting that the absence of collapse is itself a form of damage. I have thought carefully about how to answer. The most honest answer is, I was calm because the situation, for all its devastation, was clear. The question of what had happened was answered. The question of what to do was answerable. What remained was the doing of it. And the doing of it, the phone calls, the account changes, the folders of documentation, the nights in the hospital room, was simply work. It was the same quality of work I brought to every difficult case in my professional life. Complete attention, methodical execution, refusal to allow premature pattern closing or emotional investment in a particular outcome to compromise the accuracy of the result. My wife believed, I think, that my love for my son was a leverage point. That the depth of what I felt for him would create a pressure she could use, a guilt, a fear, a desperation to preserve the appearance of family at any cost. She was wrong. The love was not a lever. It was a fixed coordinate. Everything else got measured against it. And when the measurement was completed, the things that didn't align with it fell away. She told her mother I was cold. Her attorney called me calculating in a communication to my attorney that I was later shown. A mutual friend, one of the ones who had reached out with the abandoning your family concern, texted me 6 months later and said he hoped I knew that not everyone handles grief the same way, and that what I had done seemed like a coping mechanism. I am a hematopathologist. Every day I look at cells that have stopped working the way they are supposed to. Some of them have changed in ways that are catastrophic and irreversible. Some have changed in ways that are damaging but addressable. The skill I have developed, over 15 years of this work, is the skill of seeing what is actually there, not what should be there, not what was there before, not what would be most convenient to see. What is there? The system I had believed in broke. I saw what was there. I acted accordingly. My son is building his castle. His chimerism is full. His drawbridge works. I kept operating. She called me cold. She meant it as an accusation. But cold is just what clarity feels like from the outside. If this story stayed with you, if you know what it is to be the one who keeps operating when the structure shifts, hit subscribe. New stories post when they're ready. The kind where someone does the work quietly and the numbers, eventually, come out right.